The real trap that people feel with payroll is they think they need more than they do. And then they don't calculate the pieces where they do need where they do need to count it, right? Like their own hours that
Yeah.
they're investing in it. And when something comes up and they do, they're taking vacation. It's like, oh my gosh, this is a horrible week. It's like, no, it was actually a good week. If you would have been working and not paying yourself, you would have said this was a good week.
Are you feeling overwhelmed, stuck, or uncertain about how to grow your business without sacrificing what really matters most? Welcome to The Business You Really Want, the show for women ready to build a sustainable, fully aligned business. Aligned with what, you ask? You, your values, your life. Seriously, it is possible. I'm Tonya Kubo, and along with business advisor extraordinaire Gwen Bortner, we're here to show you how. All right, we are back with part 2 of our series on what independent retailers are really struggling with right now, which comes on the heels of Gwen's appearance at H&H Americas and conversations that she has had there and with several independent retailers. And this is one that, though we're going to talk about it in a retail context, actually isn't just a retail issue, right? Like payroll is the most expensive, I think, business expense for any business, right? I mean, this is why we have entire departments called human resources, because human capital is expensive. And hard to replace, honestly. Like it's easy to replace a job in many cases, but everybody brings unique qualities to a job, and so that can make it feel hard to replace it. So when one of the things that I have heard a lot, because Gwen, you work with retailers. I mean, you work with businesses like throughout North America at this point, but you've worked with businesses in Europe and various other places. And payroll is always a cost. It's always kind of like the highest line item. It's even higher than inventory. And we talked about inventory in the last episode. One of the reasons I think that payroll is painful, even in areas where wages are really low, because we're in California, like minimum wage is pretty high here.
Oh yeah.
But where wages are low, why it's still problematic is because, especially for the independent retailer, right? It's not so much just the labor cost, it's the labor utilization. You talk about this all the time, is that, like me as a service provider, for instance, I can bring people in just when I have a big project that takes more than me to deliver. But when you own a brick and mortar shop, you've got to staff your store anytime it's open, whether customers choose to show up or not. And that creates this challenge between I have to have people here, but am I getting my money's worth if I don't have people shopping in the store? So Gwen, why don't you give me your perspective on why payroll is a challenge for the independent retailer?
Well, I think you really hit on the key thing, which is there's a certain amount of staff hours that you have to pay for, regardless if anyone ever walks in the store, right? And it's why I will encourage small retail businesses, particularly in environments where the weather can be extreme, to close, on certain days, because it's like the chance anyone's going to come out today to buy this thing is really, really slim. And you've got a certain amount of cost. You're going to pay rent regardless. You're going to pay, some amount of utilities regardless. There's certain things that have to happen. And payroll is one of those things unless you choose to close the store, right? So in areas like where they have blizzards or, those kind of things, it's like, yeah, you may a day before when there's supposed to be a big blizzard say, send out a message in whatever forms you have to say, we're not going to open because we don't expect any of you are going to come here anyway. You don't actually say that, but that's really what you're saying. And part of it is so you can save that cost, because that is the challenge with retail and trying to figure out what are those hours that it makes sense to be open? What are those days that it makes sense to be open? I mean, every business is different. So I'm not going to say the best thing is blah, 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 because of course, context matters, right? This is another example. Depends on what you're selling, depends on where you are, depends on who your customer is. There's a whole lot of pieces that go into that. But it is the challenge because you've got to have someone who knows how to talk about the product, who knows how to run the cash register, who knows how to do those things, regardless of whether you have a $100 day or whether you have a $5,000 day. You need that person. And when you have the $5,000 day, you don't think about it for a moment. But when you have the $100 day, you do because it's like, yeah, I didn't even cover my payroll today,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, yeah, I think that's the biggest issue that you see is there is this cost because you've said I'm going to be open today.
Yeah. So what do you think, what do you think the average retailer gets wrong in terms of their staffing and their payroll?
There are two things that I see pretty consistently that come up. One is a lot of retailers are actually overstaffed. They're staffed for the $5,000 day, although the $5,000 day only happens once a month,
Yeah.
but they're staffed every day for it. And so that overstaffing really can become a huge issue. Sometimes the overstaffing looks like a what I'm going to call a safety issue. Like I don't want anyone to be in the store by themselves. And in some cases, I can see that. But most of the time, when we're talking about independent retail, we are not talking about the necessities of life. We are, and so the answer of why do you have two people, during these hours? Well, I don't want anyone to have to wait. Really? How long would they actually have to wait? And how painful would that be for them? Because they're probably coming into your store because they also love the thing that you sell,
Mm-hmm.
right? Whether it's yarn, fabric, pet supplies, plants, the list goes on and on and on.
Yeah, I need to interrupt you there because, I've always been a buy local person, but especially since working with you, I definitely do go out of my way to buy local now more than even before. And, I think of two recent instances. So one is I went to a local nursery because I was going to buy some plants for my yard. And, they had two people, but there's one person I've been to there before. I know that one person doesn't actually usually work front of the house. They're more of a back of the house person, but they were there. The other person was there because, this is a busy time of year in terms of working at a nursery. And we had to wait 30 minutes to be helped. There were like four people in front of us. I spent the 30 minutes looking at pretty plants, like not even plants I want to buy, Gwen. Like they're not even plants that I have any interest in growing, but they were pretty. And I like seeing how they grow them. And it was really nice. And the only thing that bothered me at all was the fact that there was no place to sit next to the pretty plants.
See, not as big of a deal. And although you were looking at pretty plants that you weren't going to buy it, my other experience is a lot of times you discover a pretty plant that you didn't know that you actually love and ended up buying. Because that's often what happens in these environments is, I went to buy, I'm going to use your plant example. I went to buy this tree and these three bushes because that's, what my layout is. And while you're there, you're like, oh my gosh, I had no idea about this thing. This thing would be perfect in this spot that I haven't figured out what I actually want for yet. you know, and so you actually often will get a bigger sale by not being quite so efficient with
Well,
your customers.
okay, so now I have to tell you the whole story, right? So I went to buy two persimmon trees, right? Because that is what I was going to do. I was going to buy two persimmon trees. No, that's not why I went. I went to buy a mandarin tree, a citrus tree. But because we had 30 minutes to wait, we looked at some annuals. So, I ended up buying 5 strawberry plants,
Okay.
because they had strawberry plants. Because the idea was I was going to buy this citrus tree to finish my citrus grove. And I wanted to see if they had a particular type of pepper plant, which they didn't. But they had these strawberry plants, and the strawberry plants looked really good. And we knew we wanted to grow strawberries anyway. So the 30 minutes we were waiting, we had that conversation, right? Because hubby and I are there together. And then it was like, well, since we're here and we've made the drive here and we've been waiting, we know we want to buy 2 persimmon trees and we weren't going to buy them right now, but shouldn't we just buy those too? Well, yeah, like we'll buy those too. And so by the time it got to our turn, we had gone from we're here to buy 1 citrus tree to we're going to buy 3 citrus trees and 5 strawberry plants.
So, yeah, your story is way more typical than not, right? Particularly for independent retail. Back to independent retail tends to be more focused, different when, you're at the quick stop or, whatever, that kind of a thing. Not the same. But when you're in the independent retail that truly is independent retail, that's usually the case. I'm there because I want a thing. Oh, but maybe I also want this other thing and this other, So being super efficient isn't necessarily, it's one of those things that costs you more because you've got more staffing and it's probably costing you in sales. You're probably not selling quite as much as you would. And quite honestly, you can usually tell if you're, I've been a cashier. I've done this type of work before. It's been a long time, but you can tell the person who really is like on a clock because they're doing this between, this appointment, and this other thing. And they thought they could just come in, buy the 1 citrus tree and get out. Right. And so often you can see that and it's like, and you just say, do you have you just reach out, 3 people behind and say, you look like you've got an appointment. It's like, yeah, I really need to get out of here. And you just ask everybody, are you okay if they've got 1 citrus tree. It'll take just a minute. And they're like, no, go ahead. Most people are, back to this is not like the grocery store or some chore that you have to do. Right. So one of the things is overstaffing. Often we're overstaffing for that $5,000 day. And what you actually described in your nursery example is where if you're doing it for safety, which I can that's a little different to argue, is have the backup person be someone who has a very focused other job other than serving the front end customers, right? They're the bookkeeper. They're, doing inventory management, receiving, purchasing, whatever. It could be the manager. It could be the owner who has other things that they need to be doing that they can be doing in the back office. And one of our clients will say their keyword is the bus just pulled up. That's their sign when the line is getting too long, when there's too many people to help.
Waiting to be helped. Yeah.
Waiting to be helped, right? Or wandering around looking like there's a lot of people that need, help out on the floor, but I've got a whole line that I'm trying to deal with, as the cashier, right? They can come out and help for that time, for that $5,000 day, situation. But the rest of the time, they're actually busy doing other work, right?
Yeah.
So that's the first thing is make sure that your staffing levels are really appropriate. The other thing that I think happens is we don't actually make sure that our folks that are at the front of the house know all of the things or are expected to do a certain number of things that aren't directly related to getting you to buy your citrus tree.
Right. So I think
Right this
now
minute.
kind of we're moving into sort of how do you get the most of the payroll investment when there's not a customer to help?
Exactly. Because that's the other piece. I find a lot of folks, when they've been hired in a sales role, think that their only role is to help a customer when a customer walks through the door. And if there isn't a customer, they're on their phone, they're scrolling, they're doing whatever. And it's like, no, there's lots of other things that can be done. They aren't necessarily as fun as helping a customer. I'll be honest. But there's almost always some amount of cleaning, sweeping,
Mhm.
tidying types of things that need to be done. A lot of these businesses create lots of dust and neatness actually matters, right?
Mm.
Even if you've got someone who officially comes in and cleans once a week or, whatever, there's still some amount of that can goes on. There is restocking of shelves. Sometimes folks want people to do that. Sometimes like, no, you don't restock shelves. Only so and so restock shelves. But there's always straightening of shelves, right? So sometimes that's just about, like going back to your pet food example that we were talking about before, is making sure that the 3 bags that got purchased, there's still 2 bags way in the back, that those are moved to the front so that they're easy to access. So someone's not having to make some big reach to try and get to that.
Mhm.
That kind of work actually takes a surprisingly large amount of time and gets overlooked. And part of it is because we start to become blind to it when we're in the shop all the time. So part of it is going through making sure that, you know, shelves are neat and they're, that the product looks the way that we want it to look. We have to train people on this. We have to make sure that they know this is part of their role. There can be other roles that they're also responsible for, depending on what the industry is. In the craft world, a lot of times there are samples that need to be made. And so if someone's not there, you need to be actually working on a sample. And we're not paying you extra for this because we're paying you to be here to work. And
Mhm.
so you're actually going to work on a sample. Might be a small piece. I mean, there's all sorts of things that can look like. Sometimes it's following up with customers that have orders that are waiting that haven't gotten picked up. I mean, there's this long list of things that we don't think about because we as an owner would do them instinctively.
Right.
It's so obvious to us that they need to be done. We don't think about enumerating them out and
Mhm.
saying, you know, after this is your next priority, your next priority, your next priority, so on and so forth. Depending on how you manage your stock, you may need to do spot counts of inventory. So that could be part of the list of today. One of the things you need to do is count the XYZ and report that back. They may not be the one putting it into the system, but they're the ones who's going to count it because there needs to be a spot count. I mean, there's lots of things that can be done. And what I encourage an owner to do is to say, list all of the things that you would be doing if there wasn't anybody else in the store right now.
Mhm.
Anything that you might possibly do. And so they always start with the things that really only they can do, right, that are owner activities. But over time, if you keep pushing them, they'll get to the things that's like, yeah, you don't need to be doing that. That can be an employee. That can be an employee. That can be an employee,
Right.
right? And so that becomes that list. That I think is the other thing that gets missed is that we don't make sure that the staff that we have is being fully utilized. Not because they don't want to do the work, because they just don't know it's the work that needs to be done.
Yeah. Well, and in this, you talking about kind of the things that the owners do versus, and writing that down. It also makes me wonder though, I'm trying to think of how to phrase this as a question. So I'll just say I have seen this as a problem, and then maybe you can like reverse
Okay.
engineer it as the question to answer.
Okay, great. Go ahead.
So one of the things that I see as a problem, like when the independent retailer is working to get themselves out of the day to day more, and they freak out about the payroll costs, and they're like, "See, I can't pull myself out of the business because payroll is too expensive," and da 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 da. And what we have come to find out is they're not paying themselves for the
Yeah,
hours they work on the floor, and so they suffer sticker shock when they're paying a staff member to be on the floor. And then it's like, I shouldn't have to pay this person to do this thing when, we're not bringing in any money. But really, the problem isn't the payroll expense. The problem is that's a payroll expense that the owner should have always factored in.
yeah. It is definitely a problem that we'll see with folks, especially when they're first starting out, because part of what they will do and justify in their mind, and potentially rightly so, is they're reinvesting into the business. And the way they're reinvesting into the business is putting in their time without being paid.
Yeah.
Okay. And when you're first starting out, there's some amount of that probably will have to be done. That, makes
Mhm.
perfect sense. But what I encourage folks to do as really from the beginning is still track how much should you be paid
Mm.
for the job that you're doing. And so when it's being a cashier, for the
Mhm.
business, you should be being paid whatever you would pay any other person for that role. When you're actually being the manager of the business, that's probably a different rate.
Mhm.
Okay. And the pieces go on because of exactly what you said. If something comes up and you need someone to cover the hours that are normally your hours, you're going to have to pay them.
Right.
And so you need to know what is that payroll burden that
Right.
that's actually there, whether you're doing it or not. And if you can't get to a point in a relatively short period of time, and when I say relatively short, this is another, context matters, but I would say, in the 6 to 18 month range, if you can't get to a point where you're paying yourself at least as much as you would pay someone else to do the job, you haven't created a business that's sustainable because someone has to do that job and someone needs to get paid for it. I've seen many, many, many times where folks will buy someone else's business that looks successful, appears successful. The books say they're successful. I always ask questions later. They never ask me beforehand, which is always problematic. You should talk to
Mhm.
someone beforehand that knows to ask different questions. But what we find often is the reason it looked profitable is the profit was actually how much money should have been going, if not more, to do the work that the owner was doing.
Mhm.
And so, I'm just going to make up random numbers that may or may not be true. So it may say, like, oh, yeah, the business made $40,000 this year. But what you find is if you actually paid someone to do the work that the owner was doing, it would be $60,000. So therefore, the business actually lost $20,000 this year
Yeah.
because they didn't pay themselves. So it
Right.
looks profitable. That is not profitable because you have to, as an owner, the business has to make money without you putting time into it. Right? This is the example I use all the time. If I invest in Ford Motor Company, they're not expecting me to show up and work on the line. They don't want me to show up and work on the line. If I do show up and work on the line, I get paid as a worker on the
Yeah.
line, right? And so this is that same thing. There's an ownership piece that should generate money, but there's also the piece of the business itself. And so it is true a lot of people get stuck with sticker shock because they're like, shouldn't it be, I'm making less than I was before. And it's like, well, so are you working as much in the business? No, I'm working a little bit less. Were you paying yourself for the time you were working in the business? No. Are you paying someone for that time now? Yes. Hello. Simple math.
All right. So, on the topic of payroll being expensive, or at least feeling expensive, what else were you hearing at the conference, or what other conversations coming up from H&H Americas or from other retailers that you think are important to address before we close this episode?
Well, I think this is another example of you've got to get really clear on what your business needs, not necessarily what's expected based on all the other businesses around you. So one of the conversations that comes up in these environments regularly are what are your hours?
Mhm.
And a lot of people go by what I'm going to call standard store hours because that's what they think that they should do. But I had a client a number of years ago who dropped their store hours almost in half, not
Mm.
quite, almost in half, and didn't actually change the amount that they were making
Oh, wow.
because the people who were coming to actually shop and buy only came in this much smaller piece, but they had opened their store hours because that's when stores are open, right? Sometimes you're in an environment where you're required to be open certain hours. That would be something I would look at to say, like, is that actually work for my business? What days, what hours, those kind of things. So don't get caught in but this is what everybody does, because that may or may not actually be useful for you and who your customer is and what you're selling and, all of those things. Sometimes it is driven by the product that you're selling. Like, I can't imagine a nursery being open in the middle of the night, like night hours. Like
Yeah.
that would be weird, because you expect to see plants in the sun and you're outside and, there's all sorts of things. Like, that would feel really odd to me. But maybe instead of closing at 5, you stay open till 6 or 7. Or I imagine, I don't actually know this is true because I haven't paid that close of attention, but you probably can tell me. Nursery may change their hours for summer hours versus winter hours
Yep.
because the daylight changes. There's more people coming during certain seasons, right? So you don't have to keep your hours always the same. Don't get caught doing
Yeah.
what everyone else is doing.
Well, and I mean, I think that's a really good point. So the nursery that I love is open Tuesday through Saturday. Like that, those are the days they are open those days year round. However, in the winter months, and I only discovered them last November, so I can't speak to really what they do in the fall. But in the winter months, they
Right?
are open noon to 5, Tuesday through Saturday. And then I want to say it's around April 15th-ish. They open up for their, spring, their gardening hours, I think is what they call it. And then they are open 8 to 5, Tuesday through Saturday. But they are open 8 to 5, Tuesday through Saturday, I want to say from like April to August. And then the rest of the time it's noon to 5. And, and they are lovely. Like, they don't have a fancy website. You can't buy anything on their website, but you can call them, you can email them if you know exactly what you want and you want to pick it up quickly. They'll make an appointment for you to do that, but it has to be within those hours. So you're right. They're not open all the time.
Right.
And, to your point about people waiting, I mean, there is another business. It's a little different model, but they oftentimes only staff one person in town. And that person just closes the shop when they need to go to the bathroom or when they take a lunch break. There's a little "will be back by" sign.
Yep.
And I have gone there. I want to get something done really quick on my lunch break. Gone there and they've been closed. And you know what, Gwen? I just make Brian go back after work.
It's one of those things that we think we're going to lose a customer. And if they're truly our customer, we're not. We may lose that particular sale, that moment, that time, possibly, but usually not. Usually, they'll just send Brian back later to buy the thing. And part of it is what you condition your customers to expect. And so I think the real trap that people feel with payroll is they think they need more than they do. And then they don't calculate the pieces where they do need to count it, right? Like their own hours that they're investing in it. And when something comes up and they're taking vacation, it's like, oh my gosh, this is a horrible week. It's like, no, it was actually a good week. If you would have been working and not paying yourself, you would have said this was a good week. So this is this is important information, to have as you're looking forward, and being clear about what roles do you really need to be paying someone to do. One of my other clients has realized that she's been doing a lot of back office work because she thought she had to, although she has someone who loves the back office work, who she trusts, who does a really good job. And she's been paying other people to be in front of the store because she felt like, well, that's lower level work. I shouldn't do that. But it's actually the part that she loves, and people come specifically to meet her.
Right.
Right. And so she's been able to let go a couple staff people because she isn't trying to staff the store without her when she actually wants to be in front of the store, right?
Yeah.
So make sure you aren't getting caught in any of the, "Oh, well, I have to pay someone to do this because I shouldn't be doing this." Maybe you can't do it, that's a different thing. But but really looking at where are the best places to be investing in staff
Mhm.
and what those investments look like.
Yeah. So, I mean, to wrap us up, it's really about realizing that if you feel trapped by your payroll, chances are you built the trap. And because you built the trap, you know how to get out of it. And if it doesn't make perfect sense to you, if you don't see it clearly, like what your exit strategy from your trap should be, or if some of these ideas are new to you, you haven't thought about them and you're not sure if they're going to work in your situation, definitely book a clarity call with Gwen, everydayeffectiveness.com/clarity, because yet again, I am no help to you in these circumstances. This is a Gwen thing and only a Gwen thing. But when we come back next time, right, we're going to continue this series. So we've got part 3 coming up. And part 3 is what I consider the other side of this payroll coin, which is the customer service trap. Because I do think that there are some things that we think, some sacred cows that give spoiled milk when it comes to customer service that also affect our payroll expenses and ultimately affect the profitability of our business. So please join us for that. But if you can't wait, definitely get on Gwen's calendar at everydayeffectiveness.com/clarity. And otherwise, we will see you next time. Thanks for tuning in to The Business You Really Want with Gwen Bortner. I'm Tonya Kubo, reminding you that sustainable success is within reach. Make sure to subscribe to the show and visit thebusinessyoureallyWant.com for more resources. Until next time, keep dreaming big and acting with intention.